Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk. Time for the show.
Nice.
Welcome to the pilot of Once a DJ. You're going to hear a conversation with DJ Ynot, aka Tony Garcia, a great DJing human with a 20-year career covering a range of gigs from restaurants to bars to support gigs for your favourite rappers and DJs. Nowadays he swapped DJing for running his record store Lucky Records in Miami. In this chat we learn about his come up and the opportunities he's carved out along the way, from the networking benefits of a print shop to when opening for Britney Spears goes wrong, to how an insurance job 40 years ago got him some great stock for his record shop. This conversation was initially intended purely for research purposes, but there were so many good points and good stories that I couldn't not share this as an episode. So sit back and plug in, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Firstly, sort of how you got into DJing. You're in Miami, right?
Yeah, currently in Miami. I was born in Orlando, Florida, which is 4 hours north of here. Moved to Portland, Oregon when I was 8, and I lived there till I was 19.
So what's the music scene like there? Is that, because I'd assume, this is my British, very potted knowledge of the USA, but I'd assume that to be more of like a grunge sort of area, because that's near Seattle, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a sister city to Seattle. And I would say that's probably not a wrong take, grunge and that style of music, was definitely pretty popular there in the 90s when I was coming up.
Do you mind me asking how old you are now?
39. So, I moved there in 92. I was like a little kid, high school and all that was out there. The underground hip hop scene, for whatever reason, there was like a thing. There's kind of like this hippie culture there, and they gravitated towards underground hip hop, the real shit, if you will.
So it's more like conscious, like Good Life Cafe stuff, and
well, at least the scene that I was into at the time, like b-boying, scratching, going to see the Living Legends or something like that at in high school. Or
how far up from the Bay Area are you in? Is it quite away, or
it's relatively close in terms of like the influence? So all that stuff in terms of like the gangster rap, G-Funk side, I kind of trickled over, and then because we're on that West Coast swing, a lot of touring acts came through. So, anytime there was an underground hip hop tour, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, make their way south. And that was kind of like an entry point for me, was going to the shows.
So what sort of age would you have been going to shows?
15, 16.
Was that scene quite kind of calm?
Yes and no, I guess. When you say calm, what do you like? You mean like?
I mean, like sort of like the atmosphere of that. Was there much trouble?
I mean, yes and no, depending on the show. Like, I remember seeing Raekwon, and there was like people in the front row like throwing up gang signs. I was on the West Coast, so there's like a little bit of gang influence there. But for the most part, a lot of the shows I went to, like Black Lucius or something like that, was relatively chill. I never felt like there was any kind of sense of that. When I think about it, I don't really remember anything too crazy happening. Maybe we'd smoke a couple joints, enjoy the show, and that was kind of that. I'll try to remember, all the Wu-Tang stuff, the Roots, things like that. Hieroglyphics, Del the Funk Homo Sapien, that kind of stuff. I'm trying to remember. It's been such a long time, but all of the stuff from any underground hip hop act that came through, I would go to check out with my friends and what have you. And I'd go to the b-boy battles and see the DJs with the breaks, and go to the shows early to catch the opening DJ. When you're walking in, there's always a DJ there warming the crowd or whatever. prior to even moving there, and this just ties in with, you know, your question of like knowing the whole story. When I was living in Orlando and I was 7, 8 years old, I was getting DJ Magic Mike tapes.
Oh, nice.
Which were like, you know, bass music. He was based in Orlando, and he spanned so many different generations. But locally, you know, he was a hero. He was a DJ, he scratched, he made bass music. I had the cassettes. You know, I don't think I really had a reference in terms of like visually, but I did have the tapes, you know?
So would Luke have been doing things like that? Like Two Live Crew were around then, I guess.
Yeah, they weren't really on my radar. I think I heard Me So Horny on the radio like once with my cousin. And they were definitely, you know, they were doing stuff. But where I was in Orlando, I was a little kid. I don't know how those Magic Mike tapes made it to my hand, but like they did. And that was like my first, like, oh, DJ Magic Mike, you know what I mean? And anyways, I moved to Portland, lived there, did the underground hip hop thing. Probably similar in terms of like your entry point, scratch pickles, executioners, turntablism, scratching, you know, you get one belt drive turntable, one 1200, so you can work on your cuts on the one side, you know, buying scratch records and 12 inches, you know, underground hip hop stuff, you know, super duck breaks, all that. And that was kind of like the entry point. So like the late 90s, early 2000s, independent hip hop stuff, trying to learn cuts and hone the craft and, you know, turntablist stuff and all that.
Did you ever compete or anything?
I did a couple battles, never, and, you know, nothing serious, you know, local stuff, you know, the Guitar Center. That was probably the main thing. And, you know, just like that scene in general, you know, so like late 90s, early 2000s, got my first setup, out the back of the Source magazine, you know, bought the little starter kit, which was absolute trash, 2 belt drive turntables and a really cheap mixer. I think it was $300.
What, for the full setup?
Yeah.
That is cheap.
So like at the back of the Source, they'd have like upstairs records, and different stores would have like, get your starter kit. And in the pictures, you see 2 turntables and a mixer, you think this is nice, right? But then it gets delivered. This is like, you know, kind of pre-internet. So you're not like Googling like, is this decent or not? Anyways, underground hip hop setup. I'm in high school at the time. Wasn't really like a DJ in terms of like party rocker, what have you. Just kind of like in the bedroom, cutting it up to, you know, Pete Rock and high tech instrumentals or whatever. Did get booked for a dance. I remember my first real gig was at high school. It was for this dance we had, and I think one of the teachers was trying to show me that you could earn money through DJing, right?
That's cool.
Yeah, it was for this club that they had, and so he said, you know, we'll book you to do this dance. It wasn't anything crazy, but I mean, at the time I only had like EPMD, and, you know, I didn't have the records for it, you know, but I did it, and it was fun. I bought a few things, you know, to prepare myself for it. I remember my b-boy friends came out and did a little break thing during it, and that was probably junior or senior year of high school, and it was great. You know, that was my first taste of like, you know, I think I got a check for it.
From there, did you start doing kind of bars and things like that straight away, or were you like back in the bedroom for a while?
Yeah, that was just the very first taste of it. There was a pretty long trajectory to get me to like being a working DJ. From there, I lived in Portland another couple of years. I remember I did a couple more things at the high school. They had like skate shows where they'd set up a mini ramp like in the lunchroom, and I would DJ those. And then I did like a frat party, I think, once for Portland State when I was like in high school, which was pretty cool.
Jesus, how was that? Was it wild?
It was wild, you know, keggers, you know, and I was like a kid, so I thought it was the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, you see, I think of frat parties, and all I can think of now, because of the films I've seen, is just like EDM.
No, man, this was, you know, I remember, and this is kind of embarrassing. I mean, the biggest song of the night was P.D. Pablo, you know, Mr. Shirt, you know, the helicopter. And I'd gotten that record. My sister had moved back to Florida at the time, and she was going to University of Central Florida. She was dating a DJ, and he would give me like the promo records he would get that he didn't want. I was 19. I moved back to Orlando. I was going to community college in Portland.
What took you from Orlando to Portland? Was it like your parents?
Yeah, parents split up. Mom got a job. But yeah, so I had most of my family, pretty much all my family still lived in Florida. My dad, grandma, his side of the family, my mom's side of the family. So I was back and forth, and I would go back for the summers. And actually, now I'm really thinking about it, this kind of ties in with my identifying DJing and what was going on. I would always record the mix shows on radio, on the 102 Jams hip hop station, because in Portland, it's a very white place. There was no urban radio. There was no hip hop station. Didn't exist up until like a certain year. You know, the only access I had to hip hop music, which is kind of my entry point, was like Rap City. No, not Rap City, UMTV Raps, excuse me. Thing I played on MTV and seeing the videos. So when I go visit my dad over the summers, I would watch Rap City. I would record the mix shows from the DJs in Orlando, and then I'd play them, you know, all year long when I was back home. And, you know, you memorize exactly the cuts and the doubles and the little routine, and just like the mix, you know, like you hear it in your head when you hear a certain song. You're a DJ, I'm sure you can empathize with this. You kind of remember how it sounded on the mix, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah, I remember hearing the Z-Trip Radar Future Primitive, and that was the first time I read, because I had paid in full the cold cut one. For some reason, my stepdad had it, and I don't understand why he had it. But like I had that because I just raided it from his records, and I remember hearing it on the Z-Trip and Radar, and it's like, sometimes you hear a song in the context, and you're like, oh my God, this song's amazing.
Yeah.
And I'd never thought that about it before. But yeah, like, are there any kind of standout mixes that kind of define things? So, because for me, it's things like, yeah, product placement, rare equations, where I was like, oh my God. Like, it opened the world of sort of jazz funk and CTI and stuff like that. I was like, oh. And like the Pete Rock digging on blues, amazing. That was probably a bit of a later listen. Are there any sort of certain things from that era that really kind of galvanized what you wanted to be as a DJ?
Honestly, man, not that I can remember. I did record the mix shows off the radio, and I do remember like certain things about those mixes, but it wasn't anything like this one particular, you know.
Yeah.
And that was when mixtape culture, at least like on the East Coast of the States, was like more about exclusives and not about DJ skills per se. So like I would get like a DJ Clue mixtape with him just screaming.
This is another thing like I think would be a really cool thing to get a documentary about, would be kind of the street mixtapes. Over here, you don't know anything about this like street mixtape culture, like Flex and everyone like that.
It definitely boiled over at a certain point, the mixtape thing, because I remember, and this will kind of go back to my story. You know, I moved to Orlando to be in the Disney college program.
Oh, why?
So my dad, my sister lived in Orlando. She'd gone to college down there. My family lived down there. I figured I would join this college program, which was like an internship. It was a way for them to get like cheap, you know, basically labor for college kids to come down and work the summer. And that was how I ended up back in Florida, was through that college program. I actually got fired from the job. And this is a little embarrassing, but whatever, it's all part of the story, right? So they had a place called Downtown Disney, and it was little nightclubs and bars that Disney owned. And, you know, they had a night when all the cast members that worked at Disney would go there. It was like free, like Tuesdays, I believe. And all of us young college-age kids would get drunk beforehand and go down there and whatever, you know? So I'd gotten wasted with my friends prior to going to the club, and I went to this place, this BET soundstage it was, and the DJ was just playing this shit of the times, you know, Yin Yang Twins and whatever was popular in that moment. And I was coming from like keep it real, you know, underground hip hop mindset, and they had like a little request clipboard, and I was like, yo, like, I was also drunk, intoxicated, so I was, yo, play some real shit, man. What is this? Blah, 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 you know? Play some Dilated Peoples or, you know, some Tribe, whatever. I don't really remember, you know, but I got booted from the club. And because of that, when I went to show them my ID, they saw my Disney ID, and I got fired the very next day for being underage and drunk on Disney property as a Disney employee, right? And it was like a 6-month internship I was supposed to do, and I think I made it to like 2 or 3, and then that kind of transpired. I actually ended up knowing that DJ and working with him later on, years later, which is funny, but that happens. I stayed in Orlando. I went to community college there. I decided I wanted to go back to Oregon. It was too rainy and cold. The climate there is probably much like England, right, in terms of like 40 degrees, overcast.
Yeah.
It's not great sometimes of the year. Whereas, Florida is all fun and sun. At least in my mind, that's how I had it at the time. And just tying it back into the whole mixtape thing, I had met a kid in community college who was like a really pretty popular mixtape DJ like at the time, but didn't even know how to DJ at all, right? He would just line the songs up in his computer and get the exclusives, print up a cover, put his name on it, and put it out.
So what era is this then? Is it early 2000s?
2002, 3, 4.
So how was he getting the exclusives? Was he getting the vinyl?
He was getting, like, people were making like exclusive freestyles, so they would record them and just email them to him. But he was on like this Bum Squad DJs thing at the time, and he was getting records sent to his house, which he never used because I think he might have gotten a turntable at some point, but it wasn't really his thing. And so he would say, hey, take whatever you want. He would get records in the mail every day. I would come through and just grab, whatever.
Nice.
Pretty cool for me anyways at the time. Free records,
Yeah.
So, I don't know, whatever. That just kind of ties in with the mixtape thing because this was a guy who didn't really DJ but was making mixtapes that I befriended and was getting records from at some point. From Portland to Orlando, I still kind of continued on with the underground hip-hop stuff. I was practicing scratching to no one. I knew no one, just messing around in the bedroom. I ended up DJing a show on OK Player. This kid, Sean, had put up a post saying they're doing a Little Brother show for UCF, which was like the college there. It was a hip hop group, like a club that they had started. And so they got funds from the school to put on a show. They booked Little Brother, and I guess he was looking for an opening DJ. I messaged him and ended up DJing the show.
So you messaged him through OK Player?
Yeah, through the DMs.
So you must have been quite early, because I was reading, I didn't really know what OK Player was until I was reading the Dilla book the other week.
Really?
Yeah, like I was aware of it, but I didn't really know what it was and what its significance was, and about how people like Little Brother came through that, and there was foreign exchange and some other bits, wasn't there, that came through there. So that's quite a significant kind of break, isn't it? That's quite a kind of right place at the right time, just in terms of the internet, really.
Yeah, OK Player was, back then, social media didn't really exist yet, I don't think. Maybe MySpace had started, I don't really remember. But there was like, these different message boards, and OK Player being one of the bigger ones where, like-minded aficionados of music and what have you would get on and discuss things. I don't remember how I found out about it, but yeah, it was, they're actively engaging with people for a number of years, back then. So yeah, I met this guy, Sean, DJ this show. Then I started doing some events for like the hip hop club at UCF. I did like an AIDS awareness thing on campus. And, back then I was once again strictly underground hip hop guy. Didn't really have my ears open to other stuff. I was a little closed off in that regard.
So were you not even checking out sample sources, or were you just purely hip hop?
Purely hip hop up to a point. So I did a battle at Guitar Center in Orlando. And this kind of also ties into the Magic Mike thing. He was one of the judges.
Oh, wow.
So at that battle, it was one of the spinoffs, and it wasn't a big deal. It was like the way the store, I guess, would generate, revenue and get people interested in DJing. They would have these battles annually. And I battled this guy that was in town from Atlanta. He had moved to Winter Park, Florida, where I lived, which is right outside Orlando, to go to Full Sail, which is like an audio engineering school. So there was like a lot of like budding producers and, people interested in music that went to the school, DJs, what have you. And I battled him. We became friends, and he had owned a record store in Atlanta, or even a partnership or something called More Dusty Than Digital. So we started hanging out, pretty frequently. I'd go to his apartment. He had just boxes and boxes of records from the shop he had, his personal collection, and then just stuff that he'd accumulated. And he would kind of put me on, like, hey, you have this record, and be like Grover Washington, Mr. Magic, or Hydra, or Breakbeat, 101, Ramsey Lewis, things that like now are like, I don't know, I figure like most people know, but maybe not. But at the time I was pretty green, so like that was kind of a good entry point into like a lot of records was through Rob and that friendship. He would sell me stuff. He'd be like, yo, do you have this? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, it's the sample to whatever. And that kind of started the whole trajectory of all music. And, it's kind of a similar story to most people where you're like, oh, this was sampled. And then your appreciation of music just grows from there. You start listening to everything because you realize everything's great. You either like it or you don't, right? So it's like, you got your side rock, you got, you start with the breaks and the samples, and then it just jazz and kind of grows from there. So that was kind of what got me into deeper stuff, if you will.
Yeah.
Outside of the underground hip hop realm. And the spectrum of DJing, you have to like learn, right, what your audience likes, and this is what kind of maybe puts some of us off, right? Yourself and myself included. My sister had the boyfriend that I told you about that was a DJ. And I remember going to a party, and he was in underground hip hop too, and he'd give me mixtapes that he made. But then I remember going to a party, he played like a college party, and him dropping like a cut off Michael Jackson's Off the Wall. People going crazy. And then I learned, I'm like, oh, it's not about like this. This is actually good as well. And it kind of opened my perspective a bit in terms of like dance floors, and what I like isn't necessarily what they like. And it's okay to cater in certain circumstances. There's always a happy medium. Not always, but there can be a happy medium depending on the crowd. I did the underground hip hop shows and that kind of scene for a few years there in Orlando. I made some mixtapes that got circulated on the internet a little bit, nothing crazy. But through those, I met some people. At the time, I was working at Kinko's. Are you familiar with that? It's like a copy shop.
Oh, okay.
So it's like before all this digital media stuff, you'd go there and get your flyers done, your business cards, whatever. So I'd met a ton of people through working there. They'd come do flyers for shows, and got kind of acclimated with that scene in that city.
That's really interesting. I think that's really interesting.
I mean, I met so many people through that job that like, maybe they came and they were just like, hey, I need to duplicate this flyer. And I said, oh, what is this? Oh, you got a show coming up here, blah, blah, blah. Struck up a conversation. And from there, you get to know them as an individual, go to the show, get linked into the scene or what have you. I met a lot of really interesting people, both musically and just regular Joe Schmoes. But I definitely was able to meet a lot of people like in the Orlando hip hop community through that job. And it was great, I would help them out when they needed flyers. They'd come in, this is a total aside, but also worth mentioning. There was a guy that had worked there before me who I became friends with named Cub, who was a local DJ in Orlando. And at one point, Kinko's was a 24-hour business. It was open all night. And that was like kind of like their business model. And so he had ended up throwing a rave at Kinko's, like a pop-up rave, as kind of like a joke or whatever. Like
at the print shop.
At the print shop. He got fired for it.
Yeah.
But in the middle of the night, he had a crew come through. They set up turntables, lights, and everything, and had this rave. I don't think it went more than like 20, 30 minutes before the cops came and shut it down. But it's DJ related, I guess, and that was the thing. So yeah, I was working at Kinko's. I was going to community college at the time. I met all these kids at UCF. They were doing the hip hop club there. Started doing some things with them. Started doing things with the Orlando hip hop community, like the underground scene, if you will. Making mixtapes. Befriended some people. Kind of got in a crew. Did some cuts on some songs. Nothing too crazy, but
Is there anything that's out there for public consumption on Spotify or anything?
Maybe. I don't really. None of it really, I think, made it to the Spotify. There was a handful of things that are out there, mixtapes and stuff like that. But through that, I kind of ended up going to UCF. Well, not kind of. I went to UCF. I went to community college for like 5-6 years. I was just kicking up dust, taking my time.
What were you studying?
I got an associate's degree in like business, and I was going to go to the University for Business, which I didn't end up really pursuing. I went for like 1-2 semesters and then dropped out when I went to UCF. At the time, I had started DJing at a bar, which was kind of a dive downtown, called Cleo's Lounge, which was kind of like, a legendary spot in that city where, the drinks would be like this much alcohol and then hit it with a squirt of soda. And people would go there. It was like, $7-8. And the guy, the owner, Will, was like super cool guy. He liked, the funk, soul breaks, underground hip hop thing. And I had a Wednesday there for I think like 6 or 7 years.
Oh, wow.
And it was cash under the table, nothing crazy. I think it was like $150. Which at the time was nice, helped me support my habit, my record buying habit. And I was doing that. I was going to school, doing the underground hip hop stuff. Got a club gig. So the guy, Rob, who I was talking about earlier, who had gave me all the records or, sold me some records over the years, ended up moving back to Atlanta. And he had given me this night that he had just gotten started on called Saturday Thursday at this club called Firestone, which is like a legendary rave club in Orlando. And this was at the time of like the indie dance, electro, that kind of scene was starting, 2006. And so I did like the side room, which was like a smaller room. So there's 3 rooms. There's like upstairs, like the big main room, and then the side room. And that's when I learned about like kind of club DJing through that.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying Once a DJ. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on. So I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Once a DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from onceadj.bigcartel.com. And if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com. If you're an avid collector of timeless music on vinyl but don't have the budget to fork out for those pricey originals, then look no further than Be With Records. From library music to yacht rock, jazz, hip hop, disco and beyond, Be With lovingly reissue some of the coolest classics. All of their records are carefully remastered and cut to the highest standards to make sure the pressings are of peak audio quality and do justice to the music being released. And something else to note is that they don't do limited runs to drive up resale and hype. If the demand is there, they'll repress, as the focus is the music, not the profit margin. They have flat rate shipping and free UK shipping on orders over £60. And if you head to bewithrecords.com and use the discount code ONCEADJ, all one word, you'll get 10% off your order. So head to bewithrecords.com and level up those crates today. So when you say you learned about club DJing, do you mean in terms of just of DJing to a big audience or DJing to a mainstream audience, or like what sort of nuance is it with or specifically is it that you learned at that time?
I learned a lot of different skills, but one of the striking things that's, is like, there's a difference between DJing for your friends in a garage where people spin on cardboard and, you're doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Versus there's women that want to shake their ass. So you're kind of like less concerned with one and then you switch gears into the other, right?
If you get the women dancing, you get the men dancing.
Yeah, the philosophy of like, of kind of catering to a different demographic, also keeping it up tempo, keeping it upbeat, engaging people with songs they know, also kind of mixing things up. So like the night was like indie dance era, right? So in the main room, they'd have all the, Mastercraft, Justice, those kind of groups at the time, which are pretty popular. And I was just in the side room, the hip hop room. So to compete with that and to keep people in my room, was a little tricky. So I would start the night out with like breaks and b-boy stuff, and the b-boys come through and dance, and then around 11:30 would switch gears and I'd play more commercial hip hop when the ladies showed up, if you will. So I kind of learned how to strike a balance between the two and also to cater, and all those things you mentioned, were kind of like things that I picked up on in that era of my life.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because with side rooms, because I used to do 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. at a club in probably about the same era. And yeah, so that was kind of house and probably breaks, you'd have called it over. I don't know if you'd have called it breaks over there, because breaks, it's not like the like what we think of as breaks, but it is probably more that like justice and things like that. And it's a tricky one because I think you've got to have a certain element, a certain level of energy, but not go beyond that, because you've got to. It's knowing your place with what the main room is, isn't it? And you've got to be like this thing that almost like hugs it. And it's the same thing as if you're supporting an artist, knowing not to play their music, and if you support, if you're the warm-up DJ, knowing not to play the obvious big hits, say in hip-hop or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's all these little nuances, isn't there, that you pick up on. Yeah, it's dead interesting.
Definitely, like, you're part of a team because you're trying to make the night a success, right?
Yeah.
So, you want to do what's going to complement what they're doing in the other rooms, right? So, that definitely plays a part in it. Going back to the opener stuff, that was a thing for me at a time when I would open for different hip hop acts. And, through my relationships at that club, I became like the go-to guy for shows. So like, they booked KRS One, hey, come DJ before the show. Wu-Tang, different things. I think they had Eclipse at one point.
So these are all people that you've supported.
Yeah, through that particular nightclub.
Nice.
Because I was a side room guy on the Thursday, and then when something like that would pop up, they'd say, hey, you can do this. We'll put you on this as well. Which was cool. It was a lot of fun, at the time, and it was very exciting in your early 20s to just share a stage with some of these guys, and whatever. You're the warm-up DJ, but to set the tone for the night was a real honor, and those are some of my fond memories from early on before we switched gears. Those were some good times. I had ended up DJing full time for a couple of years, and it's a bit hazy, but basically I had a Wednesday night, I had a Thursday night. I'd gotten all sorts of gigs through, just people I met in the local area, house parties, Halloween just happened, Halloween parties every year, New Year's parties, weddings, things of that nature. I'd started doing the home games for the football team.
Which team?
UCF Knights.
Oh, wow.
So it's like university. So like the SGA, Student Government Association, one of the kids in the hip hop club was like the president of that. He booked me on a contract to do every home game. So I think I did like eight or 10 games that year.
Because college football is huge as well, isn't it?
Yeah, at that time that school wasn't as big in terms of like on the map, because there's like a couple big schools in Florida, and they're like Central Florida. It's not really like one of the leaders or the
Because I know my mate showed me footage from his Longhorns. So that's Austin's? Yeah, and like it seems like they're huge.
Yeah, I'm personally not into football like that, but yeah, it's definitely a thing,
Yeah.
And just the whole tailgating party element of it, college age kids tailgating. And
so were you DJing during? Because they're like the tailgating's the sitting out in the car park, isn't it?
that's the part that I would do.
That's the bit you DJ.
And set up a big tent, like this
Oh, nice.
And this was like, I'm not like in the game. This is like, the pre-party kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Big tent, and it was crazy because I was bringing out vinyl at the time. I didn't have Serato yet, and I was DJing, and it was in Central Florida. The weather is very, it can be kind of crazy. I remember one time it just thunderstorming, and I'm out there with 6 crates of records and my gear, just trying to like shield it all while there's torrential downpour. Yeah, I started meeting some people, doing some things. I mentioned not having Serato, so I guess it was around 2007 when that kind of came on my radar. There was a kid who had shown it to me a year or two earlier. I forget the earlier version, not Serato, but
Final Scratch.
Yep, with the big heavy discs.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, dude, no one's gonna use this, right? This is crazy. It's cool, but like, I don't see this being practical.
It's Final Scratch that RZA invented, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. RZA, his claim to fame, one of them, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I remember at the time, like, people were like, yo, you're still using records? Because I was doing all, club gigs and all these gigs with records. And that was kind of like, when things started changing, when Serato came out, right? People were DJing with CDs in that era, especially like the hipster electro guys, right? That have the flashlight and the big book of CDs.
Man.
And, I guess this just ties in the story because I ended up getting booked for a New Year's Eve party through a friend of mine, and this was for Joey Fatone, who was a member of NSYNC, a popular,
Yeah.
and one of my buddies, who was like a super head, underground hip hop head, had actually worked for their family, didn't want to do the gig, and he passed it along to me, and whatever, it was super lame, like nothing too exciting there other than the name recognition, right? But I did get a check for, I think it was like $1,500.
Wow.
So I took that and went and bought a laptop and Serato. And that's how, I started on the digital format stuff through that one gig that was like, a bit of a payday for me at the time. So I was broke, I was really broke back then. Supporting myself doing DJing. It was definitely like a different lifestyle, right? I lived in a studio apartment. I didn't really take much to make me happy back then, but, I didn't really have like much of a savings, and, I was kind of wilding out. I was a lot younger, lifestyle was a lot different.
Sure, around like sort of 25-ish.
Yeah, college age, 20, 21 to 25, 26. Yeah. After DJing for a couple of years, this Wednesday and Thursday, and mixed with the private gigs and whatnot, I've been able to keep myself afloat without having a day job, which was kind of like the dream at the time, right? But I kind of threw in the towel and got a job working for Sprint, like a call center job, super, super lame. I worked there for about a year, and I'd saved some money working there because they had like a lot of bonuses and things like that. And me and my friends started booking parties. And the first one we booked, we kind of decided, hey, we want to do our own thing. We don't want to go play at the club. We want to kind of create our own thing, right? So me and this guy Francis started our own parties. We booked Maceo from De La Soul.
He's supposed to be really good, isn't he? Like, I've never seen him DJ.
He's great. He's one of the the best guys I've ever met. Just a jovial, happy person to be around. DJing is great. He's a legend in our circles, anyways. And the night of the party, I was trying to leave work. I don't remember what shift I worked, but I think it was like 8 or 9 o'clock, and I was on like my last call. And it was like a customer service thing, so people trying to cancel their lines would call, and you were like the last line of defense and try to talk them out of it. And the guy was just rambling like I am now, right? And I wanted him off the phone because I wanted to leave.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to go into the club because, we were doing this thing with Maceo. I was really excited. And I said, oh, hold on, let me transfer to my manager. And I just hung up on him and left.
I've done plenty of call center work. I get it.
Yeah, like I just dipped. I was like, all right, dropped the call and went to the party, which was awesome. We lost money. I don't think it was a great success financially, but it was fun. And I bought a lot of our friends out. And we did a couple more after that. I got fired from the job, and I basically used my savings at the time to try to build a series of parties. It was very short-lived. I think we did like 3 or 4 before I realized it wasn't financially feasible, but it was our attempt at like doing it our way.
But you learn so much from things like that, though, don't you? That's the thing. I think this is a really interesting message for people generally as well. It's if you put too much emphasis purely on financial results of things, you can be quite ignorant to the amount of growth and opportunity and learning you get from the other. There's all the abstract profit you get from stuff like that.
Yeah, I think, the money in hindsight was whatever. In the big scheme of things, it didn't matter at all. We booked Kenny Dope for the next one.
Nice. I'd love to see Kenny Dope.
You never seen it?
No.
Oh, wow. See,
I love his... there's a few of his mixes that are some... Kenny Dope's in my top 3 DJs for definite.
Great, yeah, phenomenal DJ. Like, one of the greatest of all time for sure, hands down. And, yeah, we had like this... It was like a small venue called the Peacock Room. Just a tiny, like, bar with like a little side room where, like, we had these guys, and yeah, Kenny Dope came through. The next one, we had tried to book Pete Rock, and it fell apart. We got tricked by a fake manager who like took our deposit and didn't give it back, and that didn't work out so well. But learned some valuable like business lessons, in terms of like partnerships and just, like you said, it really isn't about the money, so I don't want to really focus on that. It's about creating a scene, and through that, other things materialize, in terms of gigs and friendships and opportunities, and just good times in general. We kind of just kept on going. I started another party with these local guys. called Lazy Afternoon, which we did for a few years, which was just kind of a similar concept of like doing our own thing and not having to cater. There's this bar called Barbecue Bar, which is just a little dive bar. And there was a set of turntables in the corner with a really janky sound system. And they had a Thursday night, and we would kind of rotate through there. And like one week would be my week, another week would be somebody else's. And it was super fun. But he definitely catered a bit to the crowd, right? People are drinking, they want to have fun. And we were like, we want to do like kind of our own thing. So we started this party, had some really phenomenal guests come through. It was a really good time. At the time, I had lost my job because I had hung up on a customer, and I was blowing through my savings doing these other parties in the beginning. And I think I took a temp job, and I was working at another call center for like some health benefits thing. The day I got fired, a friend of mine who had moved to Miami, named Sven, who had previously DJed with me a handful of times at Firestone in Orlando. We kept in contact, but he had moved to Miami at some point, and he calls me and he says, "Hey, I'm dating this woman, and she's the bar manager of this club, and it's a really good spot. We can do whatever we want." He's like, "I want to bring you down. What do you want to do?" And me just being like, sky's the limit. I was like, "Let's book DJ Premier." He's like, "Cool, let's do it." Got this guy's email, connected everybody, made it happen. Had Premier at this club in Miami called Bardo, which was kind of like a seminal turning point in like my DJ career, if you will. Drove down, excited. It's a 4-hour ride from Orlando to Miami. My friend drove. I was in the passenger seat getting my Serato crates ready or whatever. Showed up. It was a phenomenal time. Got to meet one of my heroes, which was great, And in terms of like DJing, and you look back on like the cool stuff you did, meeting that guy and being able to have a brief combo with him was really cool, And that night was just amazing. The club was packed, sold out. I don't know how many people it holds. It's not very big, maybe like 400, 500 people, but it's a small room. So the energy was just really great. I think I smashed it. At least I remember I did. And Premier got on and also killed it. And from there, the club was like, "Hey, we like that guy. Let's start bringing him back for our hip hop nights." So through my friendship with Sven and his, at the time, relationship with this bar manager, Anna, they started bringing me down anytime they had like a hip hop act. So I'd drive down from Orlando and be the opening DJ. I'm just kind of like all fuzzy, but there was a bunch of different stuff at the time, like Action Bronson, this one, that one.
Oh, nice.
And this was like a pretty cool era. It was like around 2011, 2012, somewhere in there.
Was that your first gig supporting someone high profile?
It wasn't. I'd done some stuff in the past, actually quite a few things up to that point, but it was one that was kind of special to me because he, in my head, was such a god, if you will. I put him on a pedestal. I'd opened for P Rock before. I actually opened for Britney Spears once in Orlando.
What was that like?
So that was a weird and strange gig. We'll say that to start. A friend of mine, Francis, was I guess a stagehand at the House of Blues. He was like an audio visual school at the time there in Orlando, and they needed a DJ for the show that she was doing at the House of Blues in Orlando. And this, happened to be the first show after she had like her mental breakdown. And I don't know how familiar you are with, Britney Spears and her moments, but it was, I think, 2007 maybe, when she shaved her head and went out to the car with the umbrella and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, this was her big comeback show. And she was doing, I think, a series of shows, like 2 or 3 shows, but this was the first one in Orlando. So I got the call, and I was pretty excited to play. Pretty big crowd, a few thousand people there, sold out. And I remember the day because I was getting ready for the gig, and I got a call from House of Blues management, and they said, "Hey, her manager wants to speak with you before the show and kind of incorporate you as a small part of the show in a segment that they're doing. If you can get down here a little bit early, that would be, be great." So, I was with Vinyl at the time, threw everything in my car, and headed out to House of Blues, which is probably like 45 minutes away from where I lived. On the way there, got a flat tire, stuck on the side of the highway. Had my sister come pick me up, take me down there, and I made it there just in the nick of time to like set up the turntables and start playing. So I didn't have to get to have like a real conversation with her management about how that was going to happen. But, you know, in a brief, you know, way, he told me this is what's going to happen. There's a costume change in the middle of the show. We just need you to pop up and pretend like you're DJing for like 30 seconds, you know, and then just pop back down. And he was very clear about, hey, don't look behind this, you know, this little curtain. That's where they're going to be changing the dancers and whatnot. So please be mindful of that. Pretty simple stuff. I remember when I got there was like a line around the block for her to see her perform. And they set me up like in the front of the stage. So I have my 1200s and I'm there DJing and I'm a bit nervous, you know, there's like a lot of people there and it's kind of out of my realm musically of what I do. Not as familiar with her audience, you know, and I remember I was playing, you know, Gorillaz, Madonna, Prince, Michael Jackson, upbeat, popular stuff from, you know, various times, you know, and at one point I was looking down, I was so nervous, everyone was started cheering. I didn't really realize why, but she was like on the front of the stage, like waving to the crowd in her pajamas before the show or whatever. So anyways, you know, I did get booed at one point. Now it's coming back to it. So I got booed because I played the Sexy Back instrumental underneath another song just to tease it. And I guess that was at the time when they were breaking up or whatever. So her fans weren't happy with that. Whatever, I DJ'd for a couple hours.
Hang on. So you got booed were you getting booed by thousands?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a pretty like Britney-centric crowd. I don't know if you know about like, you know, her fan base, but you know, they're pretty loyal.
Yeah.
And I was kind of joking around, and in my head I thought it'd be funny, you know, on this instrumental and to tease it, you know, and see it did not go over well. I mean, it was funny. It wasn't really a big deal, but you know, it was interesting. So the best part of the story comes when you know, my part of the show comes up and I pop up and there's like these old like CDJ kind of things. I don't remember in particular what they were, but whatever, I pop up and I'm like a pretty big dude, so like I'm pretending like I'm DJing. I'm just like kind of standing on my headphones, you know, doing the generic DJ stuff, you know, fake twiddling with knobs. They run back on stage and I go to hop off this little wooden platform they had there, and when I do that, my weight hits it and it causes the CD to skip. And it skips a few times, and everything was kind of going in slow motion at this point. Of course, she's lip syncing, so the dancers and her just repeated the same move like 3 or 4 times. I don't remember how many times it was. And as the CD stuttered and the show went on, nobody really blamed me for it. Nobody said anything to me. You know, I kind of just ducked in the back, and the next day it was on TMZ, which was like, you know, back then there was no social media and, you know, whatever.
Yeah, TMZ was a big deal.
But it was her, you know, lip syncing, and the CD, you know, her show CD skipped. It was my fault, so it's pretty funny.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying Want to DJ. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on. So I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Want to DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from wantodj.bigcartel.com. And if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com. If you're an avid collector of timeless music on vinyl but don't have the budget to fork out for those pricey originals, then look no further than Be With Records. From library music to yacht rock, jazz, hip-hop, disco and beyond, Be With lovingly reissue some of the coolest classics. All of their records are carefully remastered and cut to the highest standards to make sure the pressings are of peak audio quality and do justice to the music being released. And something else to note is that they don't do limited runs to drive up resale and hype. If the demand is there, they'll repress, as the focus is the music, not the profit margin. They have flat rate shipping and free UK shipping on orders over £60. And if you head to bewithrecords.com and use the discount code ONCEADJ, all one word, you'll get 10% off your order. So head to bewithrecords.com and level up those crates today. Well, it's definitely one for the grandkids. So then going back then, so you got your foot in the door at that bar then, so what was next?
So I was able to build a relationship with the club individually, and then they offered me a weekly residency. So I was doing every Wednesday night there for some time, and that was kind of what led to me moving down south to Miami.
How long was the drive again?
4 hours. 3.5, 4 hours, depending on traffic. So,
Each way?
Each way, yeah. So typically what I do is I drive down, I crash on my friend's couch, drive down Wednesday afternoon, do the night, and then go back Thursday. Or if it was, a Friday or Saturday show, maybe come for the weekend. But a lot of back and forth, beating down the highway. I had like this old Honda Civic at the time, absolute bucket. And yeah, man, it was work. When I think about that aspect of it, was a lot of work, just the commute. So my friend called me to offer me the weekly the same day I had been let go from this. I had a temp job for a little bit, like a month or two. And I was like, cool, I'm going to move to Miami. And I just got a moving truck packed up. I'd been offered 2 different residencies at the time. So I was doing Wednesdays at one club and then Saturdays at a restaurant that was called South Street. So I had 2 weeklies right off the bat, enough to kind of sustain, And that was kind of a transitional time and a wild time. It was fun. I was a lot younger, it was 28, 29, something like that. And I was moving to the city. Bit intimidating at first, but also there was a lot more opportunities in the market because, in Miami, there's a lot of DJs here, but there's also like a ton of different avenues, right? I'm DJing at a restaurant. I'm doing a Wednesday night at a club, which is kind of unheard of in Orlando, in terms of like Wednesday. There was hotels on the beach, there was pool parties, there was like, corporate parties that they do. There's all sorts of different things that happen here in Miami. There's a lot of opportunities for DJs up and coming, trying to get their feet wet and, trying to give it a go as a career, if you will. Yeah, so that time was fun. I was just coming to Miami. I was, seeing who's who and what's what. Had a lot of really cool experiences through those first couple of years. It was difficult to establish myself in the market, but eventually I was able to kind of solidify my position. I had some interesting gigs, like at that restaurant South Street. It was only open for maybe 6 months. I think I did New Year's Eve there that year, but they had like the Heat players would come in there, and this is the time of like the dynasty of LeBron James and Dwayne Wade when they're. I don't know how familiar you are with American basketball, but this is when they were going to the championship like every year for like 4 years, if you will. So I ended up DJing Dwayne Wade's Thanksgiving dinner at that restaurant. When it comes to Miami Heat fandom, he's the guy.
Yeah.
And they had rented out the restaurant that year for Thanksgiving, and I just was upstairs playing Al Green and Marvin Gaye and kind of soulful stuff, for his family, like 30, 40 people. So that was cool. I ended up losing that gig. The restaurant closed abruptly. And I got another gig at a place called Wood Tavern. And it just so happened to be that the week the restaurant was closed, I got offered this other Saturday night. So this is kind of important in the story because Miami was kind of in a state of flux. Things were changing. The whole South Beach scene was still around back then. And there was a new area opening up called Wynwood, which was kind of like a more artist driven. There were some galleries at the time. They used to do this thing called Art Walk once a month.
What was it? What was the South Beach scene?
The South Beach scene was the kind of stuff I didn't like. Velvet ropes and big room stuff, whether it be hip hop, bottle service, house music. Not necessarily bad per se, but it wasn't a scene that I personally was into.
I remember there was a thing where DJ Shadow played somewhere. Was that in Miami when he turned up to somewhere and it was one of these bottle service places because a festival had been cancelled, so someone booked Shadow or something. And I feel like that was in Miami maybe about 10 years ago, and it was just the wrong. I think he just ended up walking off.
Yeah, that was one of those big room clubs. I think it was Mansion, maybe. Shadow was an artist, and if you go to a Shadow show, you're going to check out Shadow.
Yeah.
You know, you're not there to hear him, play the top 40 songs of the day, which is an art to that as well. But yeah, that was around that time, and he got pulled. I remember hearing about that. I think Jazzy Jeff got into it around the era too, with another club. Maybe that was in Vegas. But yeah, it was like a weird time. Like the electro kind of stuff was still going on, Swedish House Mafia and all that. And I was just like this side room hip hop guy that I didn't really identify with any of that. It wasn't really my thing. So it was, EDM, I guess is what it was, right? Like that's like the term of that era. I never had into that stuff, but I was able to kind of navigate through it and do my own thing in a way. And like the South Beach thing was just, if you didn't know somebody, you were paying $40 at the door. It was like typically what you see in your head and you expect is what it was. Whereas where I was playing in Wynwood was a little more chill, you can kind of come as you are kind of thing. And it was like the antithesis of that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it, but anyways, I got a gig at this place called Wood Tavern, which had just opened a year prior, and I was doing Saturdays there. That turned into like an 8-year residency that I did every Saturday for quite a while, and that was started as a small kind of quiet place, and then it turned pretty popular and it quickly and it was just like a dive bar, if you will, but it was pretty it was large, and the music format had kind of switched over the years, which I guess is part of this conversation into getting burnt out on DJing and just kind of seeing the writing on the wall with that. But in the beginning I was playing like fun party stuff, Jackson 5 into mystical, Grooves in the Hearts, classic, stuff from years past and current. And, it was fun, it was a little bit more open in terms of what you could get away with. And then, doing the Saturdays there for years, I would get pressure from the bartenders, and the patrons to, hey, can you turn up, is what they say. Oh, let's turn up. They want to hear whatever Future, or I don't know. I can't even remember the names of some of the stuff I was playing, but it turned into like a different kind of format, which was more like hip hop, modern hip hop kind of thing. And the box got a lot smaller in terms of what you can play and what you could get away with, unless it was a sing-along song or a hip hop song or Bad Bunny towards the end there. It just, you were getting blank stares. And in the beginning, you could play some old school stuff. You can play some new stuff. You can kind of mix it up. But as the years went by, the patrons got younger. Maybe I got a little bit more jaded, but that job definitely became more difficult as the years went by, only because I felt like, in order to do a good job as a DJ, you want to cater to the people that are there. And, I want them to have fun. I'm not there for myself, right? So these songs that you play, even the songs that I love, after so many times of hearing them, I just, was just miserable.
Yeah, I know. When I was, I used to DJ at just some bars locally. I've done some good gigs, but I've not done any sort of exciting support or anything like that, or any very, very long term things. I've done things where I've done them for a year or so. But something I used to often do when I used to do the bar sets, I was able to play. I would mainly play disco, a bit of old school and golden era rap, and maybe a little bit boom bap. But songs like Mo Money Mo Problems, what an amazing song, but I would never play it because I didn't want to usher in a load of Shiny Suit era requests. And then I didn't want people, so this is mid to late 2000s, I didn't want people to be asking for a load of things like Yin Yang Twins and chingy and stuff that for one thing I didn't have, for another thing I didn't care much to have either. I just didn't want to open those doors. It's a really tricky thing, isn't it? And like you say, when the soul gets sucked out of a song for you because it's just something you're kind of almost playing on repeat because you know, well, it's gonna keep the wolf from the door.
Yeah, you know, you're talking about more money, more problems. I mean, I must have played that, I don't know, countless times, and I had 10 different ways to get out of it. You know, 10 different little routines with it, and I would switch them up depending on, you know, the mood and the week and whatever. And, you know, in hindsight, that's actually pretty good. You know, I remember when that stuff came out in the late 90s, I was like, oh, what is, you know, shiny suit stuff? That's the Jiggy era or whatever. But as I got older, I'm like, I kind of like had an affinity for it because that became better than what was coming out, right?
100%.
At least in my opinion.
It's interesting how well it's aged.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, it's timeless.
Yeah, like some of the Mace stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, do I want to hear that stuff? Not really, but does it feel bad? Not, you know, it's like, it's got a good energy to it for the most part, you know? But yeah, man, that was a really crazy time that moving to Miami, because I was doing all kinds of stuff. You know, I ended up getting a ton of gigs over the years. I did some really fun stuff, man, over those years. You know, support Shadow. I opened for Shadow and Cut Chemist when they did their tour. The
the
Africa Bambaataa one.
Oh yeah.
Where they used his records. So I got booked for that back in Orlando. Actually, I had to drive up for that, and that was crazy because I think I DJ'd on Friday, and I had to wake up early in the morning and drive back, you know, 3 hours north. It was a House of Blues, and that was a big show.
Did you get any time to talk to them?
Those guys, I saw them backstage briefly, and I was a bit nervous, so I didn't really, you know, they just said, hey, great set, whatever, and that was kind of it. And hey, nice to meet you guys, you know.
Yeah. I remember going to a record shop with Peanut Butter Wolf once and just being like, I really starstruck.
Yeah.
And just going, is it true that Madeline makes an album a day?
Yeah, I could definitely turn into a bit of a fan. But yeah, man, like that whole era was a lot of fun. I was able to kind of do all right with the gigs and so forth. When I first moved here, I was a little bit more, let's say, hungry. I was going out even when I wasn't working to kind of see who was who and what was what, and going to different spots to kind of see, you know, what it was. And, you know, DJing in Miami is a different animal.
So kind of doing your research for your job, really.
Yeah, it's research. And you talk about regional stuff, right? Like even 3 hours away from Orlando or 4 hours away, there's a regional sound here that people identify with. So I remember I got booked for this wedding. This girl, she was an artist, and she was getting married, young couple, and they wanted the song DJ Laz, Ese Morena. It was a huge Miami hit back in the day, like I think 90s, 94, 95. And I heard the song and I remember it peripherally, but I didn't have it, you know, so I had to go to Serato and get it. And then I had to have that booty bass, you know, 2 Live Crew mix on deck, you know, for that little 30 minutes or whatever, which, you know, I was kind of familiar with, but I wasn't as well versed back then as I am now, right? There's all sorts of regional stuff that's unique to this city, but yeah, man, that was a fun time. I ended up getting like a gig. I did like this restaurant called South Street, which was a old steakhouse on Miami Beach. It's been open for over 100 years. It's closed now, but back then it was still open.
Is that the one that you were saying before that you were doing on the Saturday nights?
Different restaurant.
Oh, right.
The restaurant, I'm sorry, the restaurant I said South Street, the restaurant was called The Forge, I'm sorry, on Sundays. So the chef from South Street moved over to The Forge, and she brought me along with her. And I was doing like their Sunday night dinner party, which is such an easy gig. I would roll in. I think I played from like 8 to 12. I'd get free dinner. It was just like, you know, one of those things that was like, you know, in Miami, they wanted a DJ for ambiance.
That's the sort of gigs I want more of. I don't want to make people dance. I just want to curate an atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, it was great, man. It was just easy, you know. And then I did like the Mondrian Pool, which is like a big hotel, for some time. This guy, Max, hooked me up and he made me the resident there. And that was amazing. You know, I'm just on this hotel on South Beach. There's basically a pool that overlooks the ocean. And it's just women in bikinis. And I'm just playing music, So I remember my Sundays, I would do the gig at the pool, and then I'd go to the dinner spot, and I'd be pretty much wiped after that. But
How many times a week were you DJing at the peak?
at the peak, probably 4, maybe 5. You know, I had a Saturday night, I had a Friday night, 2 on Sunday, and then I had a Monday. You get 5.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a time there I was doing 5 gigs a week. That was around like 2016, 2017.
That's intense.
It was a lot, man. It really was. The Monday night was hard because I started doing a Motown on Mondays thing here, which is like a party they do in San Francisco, and they kind of branched off into different cities.
Is that Expo that was that?
Yeah, Expo does one in LA, so they have different branches, right? And I went to San Francisco one summer and I went to the party and had fun, and I talked to the guy about doing it in Miami, so I set it up there in Miami. So I would do Friday night, Saturday night, 2 gigs on Sunday. Monday comes around, and I'm in the bar till 3 in the morning. You know, the place that it was at was open till 5, but I would, it's 3:30 would kind of end it, the music anyways, and that would be pretty intense in terms of like just feeling like a grind and getting burnt out. Making great money back then. 5 gigs a week, it was good, but yeah, it definitely it was a lot. And more so than the actual DJing itself, just the late nights, maybe the drinking on Fridays and Saturdays, if I'm being honest, and by the time Monday came around, Tuesday, I was dead to the world,
I'm not surprised.
Sleep all day. But I'm painting kind of negative picture, but it was a lot of fun, man. I had a great time, a lot of cool stories from that era. I remember that Sunday night that I did, it was like somebody's birthday, and they booked Trick Daddy and Trina at the restaurant. And I'm like, such a Miami moment. I'm sitting there DJing at the bar. It's like a quiet Sunday night. There's not much going on, but there's like a little stage set up with some instruments. And they had booked this band. And then all of a sudden, Trick Daddy rolls up and he's like, hey, he gives me a little dap, goes on stage. They do a couple songs with the band. It was pretty sick. It was a very Miami moment. That whole, I don't know, 5 or 6 years when I first came down here was just a kind of a whirlwind. A lot of partying, a lot of drinking. My friends opened up a place called Coyo Taco. So it was actually right down the street from Wood Tavern, which was a place in Wynwood, that new neighborhood that was kind of establishing itself at the time. They were there at the right place at the right time. They gave me Friday nights there. They had a tequila lounge in the back room. Small spot, but with like a really good system. So I was doing Fridays there for, 6 years, up until the pandemic, pretty much. All kinds of stuff. There's certain times of the year where, like Art Basel, where like, all these corporate entities would be in town and need DJs for gigs, so those weeks I'd be fully booked up, doing little activations and whatnot. Throughout all this, working DJ stuff, I did feel like I probably lost a little bit of my identity musically.
Yeah.
It's
such a hard thing to juggle with DJing, isn't it? Because you want to be you, but you want to put food on the table. I know people that kind of don't have a musical identity at all, but that's kind of their skill set in a way, because they'll go somewhere, have to work out, is it a hip-hop crowd, is it an EDM crowd, is it a house crowd, and they'll just have to work it out as soon as they're there and just move with whatever. Personally, I can't think of anything worse than that. It would just give me anxiety. But yeah, it is a real trade-off, because if you want the lifestyle of a working DJ, then it's something you maybe just have to do, isn't it, at times?
It's just the hard truth of it. Unless you're at a certain level, you're like a DJ Shadow, for example, or, an established producer who put out a hit or something. But, if you're just a guy on your grind getting gigs, you got to adapt to the situation, So no matter what it is, if you're doing a bar, a club, a wedding, it's just part of the job, really. And it's a hard truth. And, you grow up and you kind of, what's the word? You like fantasize about DJing, like it's art form, and, you have this in your head, like at least I did when I was younger. I was a hip hop dude, like underground hip hop head, and like, and it is and it's not, you know what I mean? When push comes to shove and you're in front of a crowd of people and they're looking at you like you just want to dance, all that kind of is thrown out the window. And then, you're playing Michael Jackson and Diana Ross for the 15 millionth time or whatever, and that's an art form in itself, you know, and I think it's kind of overlooked one because, you know, rocking a party is a discipline, and it does come with some experience and some practice. But yeah, man, like, you know, I had this identity when I moved to Miami. I was like, you know, doing hip hop and playing some Latin stuff and, you know, some interesting, or what I thought was interesting at the time, music. And that all kind of just got washed away and beat down of, you know, several years of like doing these gigs, you know, like I still had an interest in this music, but I no longer was like trying to be that DJ that, you know, was playing maybe stuff a little left to center. I was just throwing balls right down the middle. And, you know, I'm trying to do it creatively and in my own way, right? And I think I had my own like flair and style of doing it, but the box got a lot smaller for in terms of like selection, and you know, I couldn't really get away with some of the stuff I would have liked to play. And eventually I kind of felt like I was just one of the guys on the, you know, there's a handful of DJs in town that do these gigs. Some are better than others, but we're all kind of interchangeable because at the end of the day, the bar sales will ring, the owners and the managers will be happy. And it could be me, it could be you, you know, we're all kind of in the same wheelhouse of music, right? So the adapting was good and bad at the same time, if you will. Like, it's, you know, it's a double-edged sword.
Definitely. I think you're raising some really, really interesting points. This is really good stuff in terms of me thinking about things to kind of go into with people on the podcast about the life of a DJ. Because your identity is so important to you. Like you say, you know, you're young and you're getting into it and you think, right, I'm this, I'm that, or the other. And then, yeah, reality hits and there's so many different factors that make you have to compromise it. Some people can't let go of it. You know, conversely, you've got the people that totally succumb to just being an artist, DJ, whatever. The thing they want is to be a performer. Whereas, say you or I think you want to be a selector, maybe probably more than being a performer as such. You want to be curating the sound, curating the music. And then there's the people that their selection is what they're going to play. They couldn't really care less whether people enjoy it or not. And that can really hold you back, I think.
I mean, unless you're well established, the point where people know your tunes and like, you know, you're a producer or something, that's a whole different thing, you know. But in terms of just being a working DJ, yeah, you kind of have to appease the crowd and cater somewhat. And, you know, I have a good friend who's a pretty well-known disco and house DJ here, and you know, we booked him a couple times to do his thing, and you know, he told me he had a Saturday night back home where he kind of has to play, you know, in a bar that he's been doing for like 15 years. And you know, and that was an eye-opener for me because I was like, really? Like, you know, and he's like, yeah, you know, it's just whatever. I get him, it's a weekly gig. When I'm home, I do it. When I'm traveling, I do this other stuff, you know, and it's just part of his scope of DJing, you know. And
you've got to have the steady stuff. It's like in a lot of different jobs, you know. I'm guessing that some of the corporate stuff might be quite stuffy, but pay really, really well.
Yeah, see, in that case, it's worth selling out for, right?
Yeah.
When you're doing a corporate gig, I'm like, I'll play whatever you want. If the check's good, you know. And really, your identity isn't wrapped into that. At that point, you're just doing a gig, right? Because no one's there to see, you know, DJ Ynot or DJ whoever. They're just there because they're having their company holiday party or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
But I guess in some regards, having a musical identity can help you in that realm as well, if you really think about it, because sometimes they'll be like, all right, we like the energy that this guy brings or musical style, and they'll book, you know, I don't know at the time, like, you know, what was it called? New disco was popular, you know, and so they might book a new disco DJ.
Yeah.
Or something, you know? So I don't know. I will say this, you know, it was a lot of fun. Another part of the conversation is just how hard that lifestyle can be. I think people presume that you're working 4 nights a week, you know, 3 or 4 nights, you know, and they see it as a part-time and you sleep all day, but that's not really the case. There's like a lot of different stressors involved with that industry. Well, one big one that, you know, people talk about is drinking. You're the party, you become the party, and it can lead to your detriment at times, you know, because you're just constantly, you know, 3 or 4 nights a week you're in it. You know what I mean?
But yeah. I mean, it takes its toll for sure, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it kind of ties into what you were talking about earlier with like anxiety, right? you had mentioned getting anxiety when, the crowd, and the drinking is helps with that,
Right.
it would help me get into the mind state of like, all right, you kind of want to be on a similar level as the people that are there, at least kind of get loose, right? Because if you're uptight and you're like, I've definitely had times where I didn't drink. I did like a year and a half, 2 years where I just didn't drink at all, and that took some getting used to. Because when you get there, you want to have a energy about you.
Especially if you're an introvert as well.
Yeah, but I would get anxiety like when I DJ'd all the time. Like towards the end, a lot more. I don't know why. It would just kind of kick in.
Can you share what that anxiety was about? What sort of thing? What was it about? Anything kind of tangible, or was it just a general kind of fear?
It would just be an uneasiness because you'd get to a place and maybe, I don't know how to explain this, put this into words. The anxiety would stem from a place of like, you want to make these people happy. And I would feel more and more disconnected at a certain point because I wasn't as interested in the current landscape of music, right? And, things started moving at a pretty rapid pace there when digital stuff got involved, right? More so in the last 10 years. And, the crowds get younger. And then, I remember one night I was just warming up. It was like 10:30 at night and I was playing some Nas or something just to kind of, whatever. I'm just running a couple joints before the night gets really going, And this kid like went at me on Twitter and was like tweeting at me like, "Oh, this guy's putting us to sleep, blah, blah, blah." And those kind of situations would give me the most, like, because you don't want to be the guy that's lame, right? So you're looking at a crowd of young kids and you're getting blank stares, sometimes that kind of thing. People in Miami are ruthless, especially because they're drunk. I've gotten, the thumbs down, looking at the DJ booth kind of thing if you play the wrong song or something, which I'm sure happens everywhere. But yeah, man, I just think the anxiety stemmed from a place of you just wanted to do a good job and not really knowing what the crowd needs or wants at that, So, I don't know, man. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, there was definitely some times where I got a little anxious, and then the drinking would kind of just mellow you out,
Yeah, I used to get it. I probably still do to a slight extent, but if I was going somewhere where I had the pressure I was DJing at a night and I had to make people dance, that I'd get certain gigs where I would just like in the middle of the afternoon of that day, I might have booked it months before. In the middle of that day, I'd be like, as I was getting ready to go and leave to do it, I'd be like, why I said I'll do this? Because mine was always about that confrontation with people. I just felt like if someone comes up and gets funny with me, I don't know how to handle it. Because some people can be quite rude.
Totally. Yeah, learning how to deal with those. It's like any job you have, the interpersonal feelings, right? Like, I've gone on the mic and tried to embarrass people before just because, like, in the last few years there, I just stopped caring as much. And I'd still get the anxiety, but then I'd realize, like, if someone comes up to you and starts, requesting and being, whatever, and who cares? There's 10 other spots in the city you can go to. The door's there. I had my way of dealing with it, but I know, like, that was also a part of the job that got a little tricky. And learning how to compartmentalize that, where it's not an attack on you as a person. It's just maybe they don't like the style of music. Maybe they want to hear something they know, whatever, so that kind of became a thing at some point.
So, like, was there one sort of particular catalyst that made you think, I need to get out of this? Or was it lockdown or?
It was lockdown.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about music and so forth. At that point, everything had been kind of homogenized musically, right?
Yeah.
So I guess it was 2020, right? Like, but I was just kind of, I don't want to say I was phoning it in, but I was just, playing the hits, getting the job done. At the time I had a serious girlfriend. We've been together for 5-6 years now. So that had kind of changed. You talk about like interpersonal relationships. My lifestyle shifted. I couldn't be going out after I DJ'd. I had to be somewhat accountable of this other person at this point. We moved in together. That kind of changed things a bit, my perspective a bit. Getting older as well. And then, COVID happened. And I remember that Sunday getting the calls, hey, we're closing, we'll let you know, whatever. And just being like, fuck, this is it, like, and in my head, I was concerned like financially, of course, because, I was kind of living by DJing, and that was my one income source. And I had been for the past, 10, 15 years at that point. So I was pretty nervous, but it was also kind of nice. It was a relief to not have to like be out there, because going back to how the conversation started with, you were saying about like lifestyles and families and so on and so forth. There'd be times where I'd miss visiting my folks for the holiday, or whatever, because I had gigs. When you're tied to this thing, it's like you're kind of married to the industry in a way. And I guess when you get to a certain level, you can pull away when you need to. But I felt like these gigs I had to do, right. So when COVID happened, it was somewhat of a relief to just be at home, and obviously there was a lot of question marks about the future and so forth. And I did kind of give it a run afterwards. I started doing my Saturday again for a little bit. And at the time when things reopened, things were kind of earlier. So things were going till midnight and then closing, which was great, because at that point we'd all been inside for however many months, and my schedule had adjusted, my lifestyle had adjusted. I was going for long dog walks and like doing things that were like kind of normal, quote unquote, and when I went back, I just looked at it a little differently, and I didn't start doing my Friday gig again. I just kind of gave that up, which I've been doing at that point like 6 years. The Monday I never pursued again, the Motown night. So like I just had the one Saturday I was doing for a little bit, and it just felt, I don't know how to explain it, didn't feel right for me personally. I would go in, play the music, whatever, but I wasn't connecting with it the way I used to. And that was kind of the end, man. I don't know, it was kind of anticlimactic, it just kind of just echoed out of DJing. And I started going in the different direction with the record store, because before the pandemic, I was a partner in the record store.
Oh, nice.
And it was kind of like just a side hustle, me and my partner we'd leave used inventory there. We had people that worked for us, but we weren't super active like that. And then during the pandemic, I wanted to switch gears. And sorry, this is all kind of ties this to the story, but the friend who initially brought me to Miami, his name's Sven, he was the one who gave me the record store, because he has a bunch of businesses. And he's like, hey man, I have this record, or the space, you can sell records here if you want, in front of this food hall that they had.
Yeah.
So, he looked out, and then he's like, this will be good for you if you ever want to like, back away from DJing. Because I think he knew at that time I was kind of like burning out a bit.
Was he someone that you met through DJing?
Yes. Yeah, I met him through DJing. He used to be a DJ 15, 16 years ago. When I was in Orlando, I used to do a night, and he would come out with some friends and mutual friends. And then he actually ended up playing with me a couple times back then. And we kind of just stayed connected or whatever through the years. And so yeah, he's someone I met literally through DJing, yeah. And he kind of gets it, he understands, and he's gone on and done some great things in the business world, opened up a bunch of places here in Miami. And, he looked out, and he's like, hey man, you can have this. We set up a little deal, for the space, and, it was a side thing. And then now it became my main thing. And at that point, when things started reopening, I was trying to figure out a way to keep it afloat, because, we had several months of just nothing. Right. And rent to still do, and this and that and the other. So I figured it out, really applied myself. And I realized at that point that there's only so many hours in the day for you to do stuff, even with the music, right? So like, say you're really into like, digging for records and stuff, but then you got to go out and play Drake all night. Your energy is a split, right? Versus you can go full throttle one way or the other way, but when you're trying to do both, it's a little more tricky, right? So I and decided just to drop DJing as a thing, as a regular thing, and then just dig for records and do the store and kind of put my efforts there. And it's been great, man. Honestly, the lifestyle's a lot healthier. It has its stresses, and I'm not going to say it's all, it's so much better, because time-wise, I probably spend 60 hours a week, give or take.
Yeah.
I don't know. The lifestyle is different. I can't sleep till noon anymore. I can't go get twisted on a Friday night and, wake up and order pizza at 1 p.m. and, do it all again. Those carefree days are kind of over. And, I could look back on it as a good time and fun. And I think of all the experiences I had, all the, the people I got to meet. both, notable, producers and whatnot, and just, the friends that I made along the way, which has been quite a few when I really think about it. But, tons of cool experiences, tons of great life experiences. I wouldn't trade it for anything, but I'm also glad to kind of put that for now, at least in the hindsight, and the rear view. And I do get, sometimes I see videos or whatever and just think about it and I want to get back into it. And, but the truth is it's kind of behind me at this point.
Is the record shop all going well?
Yeah, I think, there's been a renewed interest in vinyl and it's been going well. We're in a pretty high traffic area and it ties in with the DJing in a sense, that there's DJs that shop there. I'm still sharing music, you know what I mean? Ultimately, my life's mission of sharing, whatever is still that itch is being scratched, if you will, And for the most part, it's going well. I mean, and sales have been great. It does a bit more of a time commitment because it's really like, they say like a business owns you.
So how do you approach buying collections at the shop?
So that is probably the funnest part for me. You meet up with total strangers and all kinds of different life circumstances that have led to them selling their records. Sometimes it's a loved one passed away, whether it was their dad, their uncle, their aunt, their grandma, etc. Sometimes someone's making a move. Sometimes it's an old DJ who's making a career change and had loads of 12 inches they've been sitting on for the past however many years that they just want to clear out. And it's interesting because you get to meet up with people from all walks of life and, you definitely talk to them. You talked about their music, how they acquired it. Some people know nothing about the collection. Some people, it's what they live for. So, that part of it I find very interesting and, it all ties together with the DJing because I have met, a fair share of DJs through buying collections and, there's some interesting stories of one guy I met during the pandemic. He had a couple heart attacks and decided, I'm not going to be around much longer. I need to get rid of these 12 inches. And he was the guy who had spun at the Limelight in New York and had, a few thousand 12 inches that I picked up from him. And it was like, not only at the end of his DJ career, it was like literally about to be the end of his life. And it really puts things in perspective. And it's very poetic in a lot of ways when you're going through someone's records that passed away or, in this case, is planning on the future, and it just kind of like lets you know, like all this is kind of in a grim way, it's temporary, and you're not taking any of this stuff with you. The music continues to live on though, and it sounds kind of cliche, but, it gets passed along, so I go to someone's house, an hour away in South Miami, I pick up a collection, then go through it and put it back into the wild for the new generation to enjoy, so it's great, and I've got a million different stories about the people I've met over the years.
So the one I'd really like to know about is when I saw that you've come up on all these Bobby Caldwell What You Won't Do for Love promos. Is it a 12 inch or a 7?
It's like a 7 technically, but it's like slightly bigger because it's heart shaped.
Yeah, looks amazing.
So yeah, this guy worked for TK Records. It was a label from this guy Henry Stone, and he's a really famous record exec here in Miami that had done a lot of great things over the years. Anyways, he had worked for him for just a handful of years in the late 70s and early 80s, and he had a box full of sealed copies of Bobby Caldwell's What You Won't Do for Love on the heart-shaped picture disc that everybody wants, and they're all sealed with the hype sticker on them, never been touched. And he's held them for, almost 40 years now at this point, and carried around with him his whole life until he met me. But it's crazy.
Yeah, I always wonder about it when people hold on to things for a long time. I just think, why bother? But then you hear a story like that, and I'm like, that's why.
Yeah, and he had some interesting stories regarding the label, and basically, like, he only worked there for, like, I think he told me 3 years, And for whatever reason, this was something he carried around with him for his whole life at this point,
Did you say it was an A&R?
No, he wasn't. He would like work in the warehouse.
Right.
And I guess at some point they were the warehouse was going to catch on fire for some sort of tax purposes. excuse me, not tax, insurance purposes. Pardon me. And before that fire took place, someone's wife had said he can go in and take a couple boxes of records, and that's one that he grabbed.
That's mad.
So basically, they were burning down the warehouse in order to get some insurance money. And they're like, "You take out a few records if you want before we do this."
That's insane.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because that's like a local lore. Is that the right word? But like lore.
Yeah.
Basically, that at some point this TK warehouse had burned down to like some electrical fire. So I guess we'll kind of leave it at that as terms of how it took place. But
God, it sounds like something out of Cocaine Cowboys.
it's Miami being Miami for sure.
Yeah. Do you ever put obscenely cheap items in the shop randomly just to kind of see if anyone finds them and gets excited?
Always. Yeah, so that's kind of something that like it's fun for me. So like I'll find like there's a local Miami record called Coke, and the group is like a house band from the late 70s, bunch of Cuban kids. They were like 16, 17, had this like funk rock kind of vibe. And you find them in Miami and they're super sought after, but they're always in kind of rough condition. They're a popular band with kids, so usually the covers have drawings on them, and I'll find them in just, kind of dogged out shape, and I'll just throw them in the dollar bin and hope somebody comes across it, and somebody always does. And it's like, yo, what's this doing in here? And I'm like, yeah. Or, just obscure random records that, maybe the cover's a little rough or something, you don't want to charge a premium for it, so you just throw it in the dollar bin and see who's the real digger and who, is really getting after it, and they get the reward.
And what's it like being record store Tony? How's life looking now? Is it a lot more relaxing? Is it harder? Was it a big change?
Yeah.
Because I guess the hours are probably a lot different.
I will say there are some parallels between, DJing and what I'm doing now. And then there's some things that are kind of flip-flops. The lifestyle is completely different. I'm waking up at 5, 6 in the morning and going to bed early, which is kind of a given, right? In terms of like work and stress and all that, it's a different kind of stress and a different kind of work completely. So I work way more hours than I did as a working DJ. And when I say that, I mean like, obviously you DJ for fun, you practice, then you go out and you do your gigs, which is 20 hours a week. Whereas, owning a small business every day is work in some respect. There's no unplugging and going away for a while. But, it's a different lifestyle. It's a different kind of stress. I would say it's a lot better on my mental health and my physical health in a lot of ways, just due to being removed from the nightlife, not drinking as much, not being in that element. I'm completely removed from like club music, if you will, or like, whatever is popular. I'm not keeping up with, the flavor of the month kind of stuff anymore. Don't ever open my Serato anymore, which is something I never thought I would do. And the parallels are cool because I'm still involved in music, and in a lot of ways, still sharing music with people, just in a different format and different capacity. And there's a lot of DJs that come by the shop, a lot of up and coming guys or women that I can make recommendations to. Hey, I think you'll like this. And all the knowledge I built up from the past 20 years, I can, kind of share with them a bit. So that part I really do appreciate. And I can say that that is kind of like the common theme between both. But it's night and day in terms of like, just the lifestyle and the day-to-day activities.
I suppose something that's quite nice is that you've got the people that want to be a performer and you've got the people that want to be a curator. And I suppose you still get that curation satisfaction, don't you? Because you're still shaping things for people. You're building a collection of what's in the shop.
Mm-hmm.
It's up to you what you want to be putting out there, and what you want to be buying from collections and things. And you can still assert that kind of influence, which is good.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the curation is totally key. My shop is really small. It only holds a few thousand records. So, when I get a big collection, I kind of look through it and pick out the bits that I think are interesting and that people would want, or that I would want, The performance aspect, I guess, isn't quite there, and that I do miss a bit because, when you're DJing and you're playing in front of a crowd of people and they're having fun and their hands are in there waving and dancing and smiling, that's a feeling that you'll get from nothing else, So that part, I will admit, I do miss a bit, but in terms of the curation, yeah, it's still there for sure. Just different styles of music and different format.
That's awesome. That's such a nice point to end on. Do you want to give a shout out for your record shop?
Yeah, shout out to Lucky Records in Miami. If you're ever in the area, please stop by, check it out.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk.
That was nice.